Okay, so we're going to do a little bit more select work. There are a few things that you need to know when using a select, and if you haven't watched the other video about installing MySQL and the SQL database, please go ahead and do that. It'll get it installed on your computer and have this database set up. So let's do some querying. Let's say we want to look at actors. So we can hit here to create a new SQL tab. One easy way to do a select all from a table is to right click and do a select rows here. But I'm just going to click this new tab, and with this database double clicked, you can see it's in bold. We can start to write some queries. So the most basic select query is select all from, and then the name of the table. So for example, staff. And if I hit this lightning bolt, you can see that if I hover, it says execute the portion of the script or everything if there's no selection. So let's execute that. And you'll see here we get some results back. You'll see down here 2 rows returned. You'll see the rows here, and you'll see the various columns: staff ID, first name, last name, address ID, picture, email. And you'll also see their values, so 1, Mike, Hillier, etc. So let's look at the film table. Just going to look at the film table. So here we're getting all the columns from film, but what if I don't want all these columns? Because it takes network resources in order to transfer all this data through the internet. So to optimize our queries and to make them tighter and neater and easier to understand, etc., we can only pull the fields we need. So for example, if I only need to, let's say I'm displaying a page that will show all these films, and I only need to, and by page I mean web page, and I only need to show the film ID, title, and description. And then maybe when you click it, we load some more info. But loading all this info at once for every single row, I mean, there are tons of rows here. This might be a lot of data. So let's assume I only need film ID, title, and description. So instead of star, which means all columns essentially, we can actually specify our column list. So I'm going to do film ID, title, and description. And in doing so, when I click execute, you'll notice that my result set, that's a very important word, result set or data set, now only contains film ID, title, and description. So this is very important, the notion of adding columns. There are some interesting things you could do with adding additional columns to this list or additional, so let's say I wanted the description column, but I wanted it all to be uppercase. So I could use functions here in order to transform some of this data. For example, I could use the upper function. And in doing so, you'll notice a few things. You'll notice this column heading is probably going to change, and you'll notice that the values in here are going to change. So let's try that. And you'll see here, upper, description, and then all of this. So obviously we have a nice film ID, title, and we have this description column, but now it's labeled as upper description. So what if we want to change this column name or this column alias? We can alias the column by using the as keyword. So upper description as, and we're going to say description. Now if we execute that, you'll notice film ID, title, description, but you'll notice the values are still using that upper function in order to transform the data. Why is this important? Because when you're trying to consume this data in languages like Python or PHP or other programming languages, you want to have these columns have names that are fairly accessible. Something like this might not be as accessible, or even if there are other functions here like concat with space, etc., it makes it harder to actually reference the column that we're looking for data for. So let's go back to a select all, and here we have the full result set. So another powerful aspect of the select statement is what's called a where clause. And the where clause is used for filtering. So for example, if I said select all from fridge where fruit equals apple, you would only give me back apples. If I said select all from fridge where fruit equals orange or apple, you would come back and give me oranges or apples if the fridge contained any. So it's very similar here where we could say select all from film where, and let's try to find something released in 2018. So you'll see I use where release here, and this is the name of the column in the table, equals, and I'm going to put 2018 here, and I'm going to execute. Now, how many rows do I expect back? I really don't know. I don't normally work with this database. I have no clue what the data set looks like. But let's execute, because this is why we use querying. We use querying in order to answer questions. So how many films in our system do we have that were released in 2018? Let's execute. None. How many were released in 2010? Let's execute. None. How many were released in 2007? Let's execute. None. It looks like, let's go 2005. None. It looks like this database only has 2016 releases. And we could probably prove that by doing less than or a greater than. So select all from film where release year is less than 2016. This would give me all films released before 2006, sorry. So let's execute that. None. How about greater than? None. So I can go back to my boss and say, oh, you asked me how many films we released before 2006. There's none in the database. So, and I'm doing that by looking at the record set and looking at how many rows are returned. There are some other ways to do that. But let's look at this querying aspect and the notion of this where clause. So let's find all rated R movies in our database. So select all from film, where, and you'll see here we have a rating. And what's nice about MySQL Workbench is on the left here, we can actually expand the table and look at the various columns while we're querying. Sometimes these tables are very extensive and the column list can be huge and we have to scroll. So this is a nice way to kind of look at the various columns involved. So let's do where rating equals R. And this should give us a list of all rated R movies. So if I execute that, 195 was returned. So we have 195 rated R movies. We can actually join these conditions by saying using words like and, or, etc. So we could say where rating equals R and rental rate is less than $5. So if I execute this, you notice that when we run this statement here, we're getting 195 rows. So there are 195 movies with an R rating in our database. Now, if I add this additional and rental rate less than 5 and I execute this, still 195 rows. So all of our rated R movies are currently less than $5 to rent. What if I did less than $3 to rent and execute that? So you'll see that we have 130 movies that are rated R and cost less than $3 to rent. And we can add as many conditions as we'd like. So another thing I could possibly do here, and title equals alone trip. So you'll see that there's only one title here that contains that name, but if I were to execute this, you'll see that I get the one record return. So this row meets all of those conditions. It has rated R, it has a rental rate less than $3, and it has a title of alone trip. What if I wanted to do an or? So I want movies that are rated R or cost more than $5 to rent. So if I execute this, rental price, rental rate. So you'll see there, error code, unknown column rental price in where clause. So I was trying to use rental price, but the column name is actually rental rate. So I was getting an error. And if I execute that, you'll see 195 rows returned. So there are some rated R movies here. There may be some non-rated R movies. We have to inspect the data set. But it doesn't look like any are greater than rental rate 5. Let's do rental rate 2 here. And let's execute. So you'll see here we're getting 729. So some of these are rated R. Some of these cost more than $2 to rent. That's what the or is. If I were to do an and, it means both things need to be true. So if I run that, you'll see that we only get rated R movies and they are greater than $2 to rent. You won't see anything less than $2 to rent here. So that's the difference between and or. And learning the where clause in these various conditions and the things you can do with it is so important. We're going to do a few more episodes on querying probably, but I'll show you one more, which is, and you'll notice how here I use quotes because that's what's called a string data type or characters. And here I use no quotes because I'm using numerics. So that's just part of the syntax for SQL. So I'm going to show you one more thing, which is the wildcard character. So what if I wanted all movies that start with the letter A? I can say title, like, and then we're going to say A, and then we're going to use the percent sign within this. So this means A and then anything after it. So if I were to execute this, you'll notice I only get movies starting with an A. How about movies starting with a Z? And I execute that, and here are movies starting with a Z. How about a movie that ends with a Z? So percent, meaning any sort of characters before it, and then a Z. And let's execute that. None of our movies end with a Z. How about an E? There you go. Fair Prejudice, Alamo Videotape, Angel's Life, etc., etc. The select statement is one of the most powerful statements in SQL. I mean, they're all important, yes, but if you're doing data analysis, data analytics, if you're querying databases in order to pull information, this select statement is so important. And then at the end of it, you can actually, if your boss says, hey, I want a list of all our movies starting with or ending with the letter E, you can write this query, execute it, and then hit save here, and export this to the desktop and say, movies with E, and then throw a date on here. So we pull this at 440p, and we could save this as a CSV and end up opening it in Excel. So being able to query data, pull data, export data is very, very pivotal and foundational to data. So SQL is definitely something you should be learning. The select statement is something you should be practicing, memorizing to the best of your ability. You can go look up W3 schools and references and figure out how to play with it, but trying to understand the select statement, and what we did here was select all, select various columns, and we dove into the where clause a bit, but there are other things you can do like order by, group by, join, etc. So we'll talk about those later, but learning those is pivotal to data. Thanks.